This is NICU Babies Parent Support with Catherine Whitaker, a podcast from Hand to Hold, a national nonprofit that provides free personalized support, resources, and community before, during, and after a NICU stay. My conversations here will focus on education and personal stories with medical and hospital professionals, counselors, therapists, and NICU moms and dads from across the country. Whether you're preparing for a NICU stay, you're currently there, or you're months and years past your stay, you belong here. The NICU is hard. We're here to help. I'm your host, Catherine Whitaker, the mom of 6 children, including my very own NICU baby, and I'm so honored you're here. Welcome back to the podcast. It's August. Our kids are in the midst of going back to school. And for some of you, that can be incredibly exciting. It's a new challenge. It's a new setting. You're excited. For some of you, it may bring a little bit of fear, a little bit of trepidation, and a little concern about, is my kid going to be okay? And not only is my kid going to be okay, but is my child going to thrive in this place that they find themselves in? And I felt like as we were starting a new school year, I wanted to talk to a school counselor specifically about something that I think many of you may have had an experience with in your family, and that's bullying. So as our children leave the NICU, sometimes we know, we're like, yes, this is the device. This is the thing that they're carrying with them. We know how to do it. And then we're going to figure it out. And then as they start to get older and they start to meet other kids and they start to be challenged in the classroom and other places, things that you didn't know that they were challenged with start to manifest themselves as they start to get into 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade and move on into high school. And I felt like it would be important to talk to someone who understood what it was like to be bullied, whether that is physical, emotional, social, cyber, whatever it may be. And I know that today's guest will be someone that you will be furiously taking notes because she is just that compassionate. She makes an excellent counselor, but she's just that good because she is an excellent human being and a good friend of mine. Sister Josephine Garrett is a native Texan, born and raised in Houston. She completed her BA in politics with a business concentration at the University of Dallas. Following her graduation, she began a 10-year career in banking, serving as vice president in the home loans division of Bank of America. In 2011, she shifted her focus big time, and she began formation to be a religious sister with the Sisters of the Holy Family of Nazareth. She is also a clinical mental health counselor for her local school, and she also serves children in private practice. And with that, let's chat counseling and bullying. Well, I'm thrilled to have a really beautiful human being, but also a really gifted counselor with me today. Sister Josephine Garrett, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Catherine, for having me.
I know that some people may be looking at you, certainly if they're looking at you on YouTube, and they may be wondering, how did a sister get to be a counselor? Because I know that you're in your bio that I just mentioned to everyone, you were in banking and then you were a sister and now you're a counselor. So maybe tell us what was the draw to counseling of all the things that you could have done?
So our group of sisters, our ministry is to strengthen family life, to help families, and to also just help there be more of a family spirit in the world. And so all the ministry and work that we do focuses on that. And so I got to discern what I would do for work or for ministry. And at first I was gonna work at a church and do faith formation. And because I thought if people learned more about their faith, they could be closer to God. But when I was in the novitiate, which is like nun school, I spent some time in a counseling office at our university in Philadelphia, and I read about what counselors do and what I hope for people to have at the end of learning. I realized it's more likely to happen at the end of counseling. And so that's kind of how I became interested in being a counselor. And then I requested permission to go to school, and the sisters said, yes, of course, that's absolutely a ministry where you can help to strengthen families. So that's how it happened. So I'm a sister, and how I serve and how I work and live our mission is as a counselor.
Well, I can attest that I have been the beneficiary of, while I don't know that it was officially counseling, but it was you being a good friend and listening. And so if you do what you did with me with the kids that you work with in the school, I know that they are receiving great wisdom and encouragement from you. So I know that we just get you for a short amount of time, but I think that I really wanted you on here because I think that preemies and NICU babies tend to encounter hard things, maybe on a higher ratio than quote unquote normal kids. And so when a parent is looking at like school counselor versus private practice counselor, what are some of the similarities and differences in some of those situations?
So it's becoming increasingly common that your school counselor will be as credentialed as your private counselor, but that's not always the case. So it's happening because schools are realizing that mental health needs are more and more prevalent. They've begun to hire like on campus mental health counselors instead of school counselors who usually may do guidance and maybe help with testing, sometimes help with schedules. That's really shifting to where school counselors are becoming more mental health focused. And so I think parents can ask that, like, what are the credentials of your school counselor? Are they a licensed mental health professional, or did they instead become a certified school counselor, which may have less of a mental health focus? But I think in a school setting, because I work in both settings, in the private practice setting and the school setting, what helps me in the school setting is I know these kids and I know their families. And so when a student is having an experience, their system that they're in, the community that they're in isn't foreign to me. And I don't only have their word to take for it. And also, like, I really like being a mental health professional in the school setting because it acts like a multidisciplinary team. So like what skills I equip a student with, I can equip their teachers with that skill to help them live it out. And I can inform the administration like this is what may be most helpful. And then we've got the parents involved. And so in a school setting, if there's a mental health professional in a school setting, it can become like a wraparound. But when you have kids who are dealing with bullying or exclusion issues, I do think it's important to have that child maybe receive services outside of the school. So to have the clinician in the school have a plan for serving that student and that family, but to have a place where this student or this child can go that's their own and that like isn't marked with experiences of a lack of safety. And so I have,
Yeah. Yeah.
students who come here and this office is where they're safe. And this is their stuff. And that they don't think anyone else plays with that kinetic sand. I have real little ones who, when they realize someone else has been here, they're like, what? What?
I'm sorry. This is my personal space.
So, um, yeah, so there can more and more there's similarities. And as schools are realizing that they need somebody on staff who understands mental health. The difference is like based on the needs and what's going to create the most safety for the child. But I do like school care because it creates a wraparound scenario.
I don't think that, I mean, I'm basing my counseling experience based on when I was growing up, and it was really the guide they really were the guidance counselor helping us
Right.
figure out what classes to take. But we live in a different world where kids aren't just being formed, with their minds, in the classroom, but their mental health and also what they bring with them when they walk in those school doors absolutely
Right.
affects them in the classroom. And I think that, I mean, it leads beautifully into my next question. Thank you very much. Is that how do you advocate for kids differently than other staff people at the school? I mean, I know you answered that a little bit, but what's your primary focus as a counselor in advocating for them, maybe in a situation where they don't know how to advocate for themselves?
Yeah, I'm always thinking what's going to help this child flourish. And so I tell like I'm in a private school setting. So I make sure the administration and the staff know like my goal is not to keep our enrollments up. And so I will not hesitate to refer a family to another school if that's what's going to help for like that child to flourish. Because when we get in these small private school settings where these kids have been going to school together since they were 4 and now they're 11, sometimes and if they're 11 and have a different or non-common developmental experience, it can get rough. And so sometimes they're going to need a different setting. They're going to need a fresh start. They're going to need a larger population of students in order to flourish developmentally. And so that's how I advocate, is to make sure that like my goal is not keeping kids in the school. It's not, making sure that someone doesn't feel like they've somehow failed or lost. It's just my eyes are on like what interventions are needed to help this child flourish, even if that means it's not staying here. So that's one way that I advocate. And then also like, and this was a lesson I had to learn, Catherine, in the school. Like I failed at this my first year in the school, probably some in the second year too, is just like being in the right space with the faculty and the administration. And so like um I can't be best friends with the faculty and the administration, because again, when push comes to shove and I really just need to advocate for what's needed for this student and this family, if we're at happy hours together all the time, it's a little bit harder for me to do that. Uh,
Yeah.
so like just having to know that I have to have the boundaries of a clinician, even in the school setting, that it's not the place where I go to make the closest friends. And that helps me to hold the space as an advocate for the child and the family. And so, yeah, just to stay client centered, which my client is the child, their family, and our community, like our community. And so, um, yeah, it's just keeping myself in a space that lets me have the authority to advocate when the time comes. Yeah.
So basically you practice what you preach. I love that.
I try.
You
I try.
there's nobody that practice what they preach is better than you. Trust me. I think that you're I just keep thinking, how can we move closer so that you can be such a good advocate? Because I think I'm laughing because people don't know this, but when we first started this Zoom call, there were two sister Josephines, and you're like, "Oh, you can delete the other one." I was like, "No, I'm trying to replicate you everywhere because
It would be too
I
much.
think that you advocate for, and those are good questions. Like, as a parent who's listening to this, what questions are you asking of your counselor? Like maybe your kid is in a school setting and it's not working. So, what are some questions that you need to ask so that they can flourish? Which, quite frankly, leads, I think, into this area that I really want to dive into is bullying. I don't know the statistics, but I know that they must be large of kids that are entering into a school setting that maybe they have something physically that the kids can see, or maybe they left the NICU with a device or something. And as they get older, the differences start to become more pronounced. And in many seasons, a way for kids to target them and make fun of them, or to really make coming to school awful and horrible and terrible. What, I guess, how normal is that for kids to do that? And then how do we help those families get those kids into a better space? And sometimes it might be that they change schools, but maybe they can't change schools. Maybe they have to stay there. Sister Josephine, what's your advice to those parents that have a kid coming home who is like, I hate this school, I feel awful, and I don't know how to make it better?
So two things. One, like when um what I've seen, I can only speak from like what I've seen clinically myself. The more visible the disability or the difference, the easier time I've had eliciting compassion from kids. And so when it's more invisible, like where I have neurodevelopmental social delays, to where this kid may have the age of 11, but like socially and emotionally, we're maybe at like age 8, in as far as like how they handle social dynamics and how they handle experiences of rejection or teasing or um that's probably where it's gotten stickiest, is where I know I've got a developmental delay or I've got a disability, but it's not as pronounced. It has been an uphill battle getting the kids to practice um yeah, just practice like good values and good character when they're coming into contact with those differences. And so children who are leaving the NICU with maybe physical disabilities, physical differences, something that's more pronounced, if you're in a public school setting or a private school that's doing what they need to be doing, um, it's sometimes even easier for those parents is to get the services they need, like the special services that they should have access to. What I've seen is even regarding services from adults, when those differences aren't as obvious to the eye and the ear, that's when it can get even more difficult for children. So my advice, if you have a child who's being bullied and it's about social, emotional, developmental differences, where when they're in their dynamics with their fellow 10 or 11-year-olds, and I'm using that age because that's where I really see it start to get painful. Like, it'll be 2nd, 3rd grade, it'll be a little bit of rub, but in 4th grade, it's
Mhm.
it's it's hitting the road hard because
Yes.
there's a social developmental jump, and so what I'll do is start to refer parents into speech therapy because speech therapy actually provides social emotional therapy because social dynamics is a
Interesting.
language. And so speech therapists have whole curriculums that can help children who maybe are not developing at the same pace socially as their peers. They have whole curriculums that can help them better enter into those social situations with more tools and like more equipped to advocate for themselves and to read those situations in a better way. Also, if you're a parent and your child is experiencing bullying of any kind, whether it's verbal, physical, especially physical, emotional, cyber, um, you want to get a documented plan to address the bullying from the school. And also to make sure, like on your end, that all the members of the staff have been informed. A lot of times in schools, things start going so quickly that you can have a conversation with a principal and you feel like, oh, well, this is the principal. How can it not all be better now? But that principal may not have told the PE teacher or may not have told the recess aide. And so to make sure that you see with your eyes like a documented plan to try to address this bullying that has the whole staff that supports your child throughout the day because it can get better if enough eyes are on it. And if enough like adults in the school are reinforcing the plan and keep their eyes on it because kids act differently. This is actually true for adults. We all act differently when we know we're being watched versus when we know we're not being watched.
That is so
And so
true.
I've actually had to, I know this is gonna sound a little bit creepy, but I actually had to get a pair of binoculars and see what was going on when these kids didn't think they were being watched.
Oh,
Because it was one word against another word, and I was tired of playing detective. So I went down to the field, the recess field,
yes, you did.
for binoculars to get like what is really going on and who's being left out and who's being mistreated when they believe they're not being watched. That is the biggest, I think one of the biggest influencers in decreasing bullying behaviors is making sure that the students understand they're being observed and there's communication between the parents and the teachers. When my students know, I know your mother, I know your father, I've got their number, behavior shift. Like when they know we're in relationship. But I guess, Catherine, the biggest point I want to make, and then also when you cannot leave the school, you want to look at making sure you have a diagnosis that goes along with some of these differences or disabilities that's documented at the school so that you therefore have services.
Yes.
So that you therefore have like what you legally ought to have because again, if a child is getting the services that they need, the support that they need, more members of the staff are advocating and understanding his or her story, that can help as well. And then if you can move schools, if that's become what's needed, that's a process that includes a lot of grief. And to just not be ashamed or shocked at your grief, especially if your school is faith-based and connected to your faith, um, to know that like God was never your school. And sometimes that can become really intertwined. Um, but that like you're not gonna be further away from God if you've had to depart from a school that was connected to your faith, and so that could be difficult and be a process that matches grief very much. But
I'm
mhm.
glad that you mentioned grief. It's a theme that continues to come up, and many guests that I visit with is that every NICU stay carries grief with it, grief of the thing that you lost. And I think that many NICU parents resonate with grief and that it's really this slow process of grief and that sometimes your child can't do something and so there's grief in that, or that you have to change schools and there's grief in that. And so it's this slow, I think, detachment from the things that we can control, the things that we can't control, and then where are we? And how do we get to the next thing? How do we help our kids thrive? Because the NICU takes no prisoners. There are, if only there were a rubric of these are the ways that you could avoid the NICU, but it doesn't really work that way. And I don't think that many times we see the challenges that our kids are facing post NICU until we put them in a new place. And many times that happens to be in a school setting, or when they change schools and move from elementary school, God bless it, to middle school, which is a whole situation of growing into who you are and figuring out what you can do and the challenges. And so I think that many parents are probably listening to this thinking, yes, say it a little louder for the people in the back. This podcast is produced by Hand to Hold, a national nonprofit, but we're more than simply a podcast. Be sure to download our app, join one of our support groups, or find one-to-one support, enjoy counseling, find loss and bereavement support, participate in a peer-to-peer mentor program, or check out our news, articles, and family stories at handtohold.org. All of that is at no cost to you. Hand to Hold's mission is to provide personalized support before, during, and after a NICU stay to help ensure that all NICU families thrive.
Yeah, I would love and one thing I wanna say, like, and I experience this when I'm referring parents, like, if you know coming out the gate, your child is gonna have some developmental differences, whether they're physical or social, emotional, or neurological, like, to engage therapies like occupational therapy, or if you need to engage psychiatric medications as early as possible, speech therapy, which includes social skills therapy, engaging all that early, but at the same time, like, I sometimes encounter families, um, who have children who have disabilities or developmental differences, and they feel like it's all on them. And I wanna say that, like, I know when I'm having to hand these referrals out, it can send the message like, "Why is it all on them?" to get their child up to whatever they need to be to but, like, it's an indication that, like, our systems need to improve and our understanding of what's normal needs to improve, um, and so I just wanna say that, like, I know that parents who are raising kids who have developmental differences oftentimes feel like the weight is all on them to get their kid caught up, and it should not be that way, like, it's a sign that something's broken, because it should be natural to include people who aren't like whatever has become the normal distribution in a community. It should be natural to do that, and, like, it's a sign that our world is broken, um, that it can be leaving families feeling like it's all on them. So, I just feel like I need to say that.
I'm actually really glad that you said that. I think that that's a common thing that we think that if we can't fix it, that somehow we missed something. We should have
Right.
done this. We should have intervened here. Why? And nobody likes our kid. Nobody wants our kids to struggle. We want them to be happy, healthy, and
Mhm.
and doing what they were intended to do. So thank you for speaking into a place where sometimes parents feel deficient. How can a counselor help them either heal through some of those traumas or help them find a place where they're comfortable both in the classroom and also in their peer group?
Yeah, so what comes to mind, in trauma therapy, no matter what type of trauma therapy you do, the gold standard is to begin with what's called a stabilization phase. And what I found is what we do in the stabilization phase are good skills for all kids, but especially kids who are like walking into a school or walking into an environment with maybe a difference or a disability. Um, like they need to be equipped with these skills even more so that the brokenness in the world, like, is less likely to kinda devour them and their self-concept. And so when counselors are working with children who we wanna equip, first we want to make sure that they are able to know what it is and how they're feeling. So what's called affect identification. So you wanna teach kids to know and name their feelings, even better if they can locate the feeling in the body. Like worry feels like, an upset stomach, and excitement feels like a quickly beating heart. So we wanna have them that skill and then also teach them to regulate their emotions. So to begin to have a sense of like, um, I am not, like this room of people is not in charge of how I feel. Like if they're bullying me, I have tools to be able to help myself feel better or deal with these emotions that come up with it. So, like, I'm not helpless in the face of this wrong behavior. Because actually, what increases the likelihood of the onset of diagnoses related to trauma is a sense of helplessness. And so we really want to make sure that like our kids know that, yeah, you've got a difference, you've got a disability, and you're still able. And like you've got some resources that we can draw on and we can help you grow in resilience so you're not helpless before other people's bad choices. So we want to teach affect identification. We want to teach emotional regulation and coping skills. And then we want to teach healthy self concept and a healthy sense of self. And then also assertive communication skills. Like kids, especially when they get in the third, fourth, and fifth grade, they sneaky. And when they bully, they know how to be sneaky. And so
Yes.
I can't have my eyes everywhere, but I can teach a child like assertive communication skills, and what to say and how to say it and how to draw boundaries. Again, to just increase their sense of effectiveness, their sense of like resilience and strength and like their sense of value, like, like you're valuable, you're strong. So affect identification, emotional regulation, assertive communication, and a healthy sense of self. So self-esteem with any of these types of kids who are maybe experiencing developmental stuff, that's got to be in the treatment plan. That's got to be in the treatment plan,
Yeah.
so that the message is you are a gift. And if someone doesn't understand that, you know how to communicate to them and correct them. And then you know how to deal with the emotions that come up when people don't treat us like we're a gift.
This feels like things that adults should be going through right now. Like, I think
It
those
was yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
we're teaching our kids this, but I know, man, but what a I guess perspective is that if we can teach our kids these things, that they
mhm,
are going to grow up into adults and they're going to realize the value, and hopefully that cycle continues. I love how you've mentioned that counseling in schools is shifting and changing, and I'm
yeah,
hoping that it's for the better. I mean, it sounds like it is, and that how we ask questions and what we, I guess, demand of our schools to say, like, we have to do better. We need better services and we need better
yes,
advocates. It's
mhm,
yeah, that's a whole other podcast.
yeah,
But yes, I'm grateful that you mentioned all of those things. That's really good advice. So I always ask my guests this question. It's my last question every time, but what's your best advice, Sister Josephine, to a parent who has a kid who's struggling and they want to be a better parent?
mm. I tell parents that, I really have loved working with parents. It's been a surprise. I didn't seek it out. Um, I wanted to specialize in trauma, and then I started, really liking working with children and adolescents. That was a surprise, and then it was a surprise that they come with parents,
Oh yeah, they have parents.
My parents, and it's like a
Well,
whole thing, like a whole thing. And so, like, being in, like, a counseling relationship with parents where we're not focused on them as individuals, but, like, their parenting, towards the child's treatment goals, that was just a surprise, and it has brought up in me a great respect for parents and, like, a significant amount of compassion for how hard you all are on yourselves. It really is just, as someone who's not a parent, I can only look at it clinically and spiritually. It leaves me brokenhearted for all of you, that you carry so much guilt, so much guilt. And so I tell parents, if I had to choose clinically, like with whatever clinical expertise I've gained, if I had to choose between a parent who got it right all the time or a parent who made several mistakes but repaired well, was able to say, I didn't get that one right. I learned from it. I'm sorry. Let's try again. I'm choosing the second parent every day of the week, twice on Sunday. Um, that type of parenting helps a child to flourish and feel secure and safe in the world, because what it says is that your value is not in not struggling. Like, your value is in, like, just showing up again and again in this relationship. And we can all do that, to according to whatever our ability is. And so I guess my encouragement for parents who may be struggling as they raise children who today are labeled as different, maybe one day it'll just be like, this is what some kids look like, and some kids look like this, maybe one day it'll just be that. Um, but as you struggle today with that, to realize like you're doing a great service to your child simply as you show up. So it's not about always getting it right. It's really just about being there, and how that helps your child grow into the person he or she ought to be. So yeah.
Ugh. Well, I should end it there and I shouldn't say anything else because that was the perfect way to end it. Sister Josephine, thank you for your excellent
You're
advice, your
welcome.
excellent perspective, and a whole lot of encouragement. Well, every week I have a guest on here, and I think they just keep delivering great wisdom to y'all. I hope that it's making you feel less alone in this sometimes scary, often frustrating, sometimes alienating experience that we have as NICU parents. But I hope that all these guests are making you feel like you are not alone. You are seen and cared for. And today's interview with Sister Josephine Garrett, who's a licensed counselor, I mean, it certainly did that for me, personally speaking. And we have had personal experience with many of the things that she shared about. And I just found myself, if you were watching on YouTube, I was nodding my head so much during the time that she was sharing her good wisdom with y'all. I think the thing that is worth saying again, and I wrote this down, just because you're different doesn't mean you aren't able. I hope that that's a message that you continue to share with your children, but also that you continue to share with yourself. She was mentioning her advice to parents is that releasing yourself from the guilt of feeling like it's all on you. So as we help our kids heal from trauma, overcome obstacles, and find their place in the world, there are people in our schools and in our lives that are going to help us get there as parents, but also help our children find their place in the world, and they are going to do great things simply because they are here. So I hope that all of the Sister Josephine's interview, definitely go back and listen to it. In fact, I think her advice about really asking the questions of what you should be looking for when it comes to your school counselor, and then if you choose to do private counseling, what that can look like and how that can be a benefit for your family. Basically, the whole interview is what I'm telling you. But those are the things that stuck out to me today. I hope that y'all have a wonderful school year, advocating for your kids, seeing them thrive, and watching them overcome new challenges. Our NICU babies are amazing. And with that, I will see y'all next time. Thanks, y'all, for listening to NICU Babies Parent Support. Every parent and every experience is welcome here. If you are a NICU parent and you're finding yourself in need of support, please download our app. You can find it in the Apple Store or on Google Play, Hand to Hold. And if you love today's episode, you can share it, you can subscribe, and you can most certainly review it. We would love, love, love your reviews. It's how we reach more NICU parents. Thanks, and I'll see y'all next time.